Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining and welcome back to Wall Street Silver. Joining us today is a very, very special chicken. Once again, that chicken is Doomberg. Thank you for joining us, Doomberg.
Ivan, Jim, always happy to be back with you guys. And as the world speeds towards just really amazing headline after amazing headline, it's funny how we never have a shortage of things to talk about. So great to be back and looking forward to a fantastic discussion.
Yeah, let's get right into it. You wrote this incredible article, Decades in Minutes. And once again, everyone, if you're not already following Doomberg on Twitter, if you have a Twitter, I would highly recommend it. Doomberg puts out some of the best stuff out there, and his Substack is in the profile, and it will be in the description of this video. But let's walk through what's going on in the world. Doomberg, you're known as an expert on energy issues. You study this stuff all the time. You write about it all the time. Your Substack just has incredible information. Everyone raves about it. And they just served up the best topic on a silver platter for you
Yeah.
in the past week. They blew up an
Yeah.
energy pipeline. So this was like right in your wheelhouse. What's your take on this? Give us the gist of what you're writing about right now.
So the analogy we use, then you always have to be careful when you use this one, is on 9/11, for most people, the real crisis began when we all saw the second plane hit the towers, because we knew in that moment that this was not an accident, that this was a deliberate act. And while nothing compares to 9/11, the same sort of cadence of headlines happened when the news of the Nord Stream pipelines and their sabotage began to broke. And so what happened is first thing we saw is that Nord Stream 2, which is this newly constructed pipeline but has not yet been put in service, suffered a catastrophic pressure drop. And that was the first headline we saw. And for a couple of hours, people were allowed to speculate, maybe this was an accident, this is a new pipeline. The world changed forever when we saw the second headline, which is Nord Stream 1, which has been in operation for more than a decade, and is a critical energy artery for the world, but particularly because it connects Russia to Germany directly, that it too had been severely damaged, perhaps irreversibly so. And when we saw that second headline, the exact same feeling we had when we watched, Flight 195 smash into the tower. We're like, okay, this is a major, serious, deliberate act, effectively an act of war, and represents a very serious geopolitical risk at a time where nuclear superpowers are already facing off in a war that has only the thinnest of veneers of being a proxy war. And so we really, our heart beat a little faster, our stomach sunk. Like, this is a really big deal and sets off an entire series of significant risks to the globe, which we get into in the article as it proceeds.
Yeah, so let's get into the article. The gist of this is Russia, everyone is. I did a poll on Twitter, and I'll have my editor put the Twitter poll on the screen. So this is the poll I ran a couple days ago, and it got almost 111,000 votes. So this is a Twitter scientifically large enough sample, I think, to be, to demonstrate who people think is actually behind blowing up the pipeline. We don't know. We have our suspicions, but this is what Twitter thinks. I think we got enough votes in this poll to be representative. What's your take on this, Doomberg?
So in the piece, we specifically did not express an opinion because literally we don't know. And one of the lines that we use in the piece, which is one of my favorites from an old mentor, which is, in the absence of knowledge, speculation is a measure of individual psychology. And there's no question that people are quick to jump to conclusions. The consensus view amongst the sort of media class is that Putin destroyed the pipelines himself. And then the sort of Twitter view, the sort of contra, capitalist rebellious type view is that the U.S. did this to sort of continue the war and to focus minds and so on. We don't have a view, but in the piece, we expressed a risk which is, and you know, we say in the piece, only the party who did it actually knows for sure they did it, and everyone else involved can only be sure that they themselves did not. And we highlight a potentially very significant risk in our view, which is, what if Putin didn't do it? So if your Twitter poll is correct, or maybe Poland did it, or Sweden did it, or pick your favorite, maybe the Dutch did it. If Putin didn't do it, and he is also blamed for it, then we are entering a very, very dangerous time where we believe the risk of nuclear war has just accelerated greatly. And just pointing that out, by the way, has been somewhat controversial. Like, how dare you even write an article discussing the hypothetical that Putin didn't do it? It shows you just where we are in the discourse, that you can't even take a 15,000-foot view of a situation and say, wow, if Putin didn't blow up his own pipelines, and then we blame him for doing it and try to punish him for it, he might respond by using nuclear weapons. And by the way, as we pointed out in the article, like just a week before, he was threatening the use of nuclear weapons. And we say in the piece, look, we were the first to admit that we got it wrong. We thought he was bluffing when he was moving into Ukraine. And we got that wrong famously, and we owned it, which is what you do when you get something wrong. So why would we just assume he's bluffing now? So, you know, in this terrible concoction of headlines where we see Putin threatening nuclear war, Putin telling Europe that their path to energy security is to open up Nord Stream 2, Nord Stream 1 and 2 get blown up, perhaps irreparably so, and now we've sort of cornered this rat, and we wonder why this, you know, we wonder why this rat might be striking out at us. And so, just for the record, the Doomberg team is unabashedly against nuclear war. We are actually pretty much against most wars. We would be very much pro peace. And if nuclear war is on offer, we're just raising our hands and saying, hey, maybe we might want to consider de-escalation pathways here, because nuclear war benefits nobody, not Putin, not the U.S., not Europe, and certainly not Ukraine. You know,
that's an interesting comment that you just made about the nuclear war. You know, the people are, you know, it's a horrible potential crisis we're going to have here, but some people just, you know, sometimes you need these memes just to point out just how ridiculous the situation is. And this one just sort of struck me recently as, you know, you're going to get us all nuked, but hey, listen up, Jack, negotiated with Putin's worse. It's like we're getting pushed over the edge, and why won't they do the natural thing? I'm reminded of a quote I heard once. You don't make peace with your friends, right? You have to, if you're going to make peace, you have to do it with people you don't necessarily want to talk to.
Well, I think, look, the situation is different because we're dealing with a nuclear superpower. You know, these sort of blanket statements about, you know, we won't negotiate with terrorists, quote unquote. Well, we always negotiate with terrorists. We kind of deal with Iran, you know, and hostages, and pick your favorite. You know, we send former presidents to North Korea to free up hostages. And, you know, such platitudes are easy to say and hard to defend. Our main point here is, before we sleepwalk into a catastrophic nuclear war, maybe we ought to hit the pause button and have an internal discussion about what we're doing. Like, and again, there was a time where that was considered a leftist statement. That was considered a you know, a pacifist statement. And yet we see this zeal for war. And now look, Putin invaded Ukraine. He's a terrible person. I wish he hadn't. He has under-delivered on the military side, and we have under-delivered on the energy side. Like, this is a very complex war. It's not gone the way anybody would have thought. But our point on this pipeline is, forget about who's to blame and forget about anything else. Our job is to highlight low probability, high risk potential outcomes. And in our view, the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines is exactly one of those. This is, if Putin truly believes he didn't do it, and he feels like he's being blamed for it, and he is suffering military setbacks in the field, which again, reports this morning seem to indicate that he might be. Right. We're pushing ourselves very close to nuclear war, and we ought to at least have a conversation about, yes, Putin is a bad man. We deal with lots of bad people. We have all kinds of economic relationships with President Xi in China, for example. Sure, Russia has committed atrocities in Ukraine. Yes, the invasion of the Ukraine was illegal. What now?
Do you think we're just pushing him into a corner and he's just going to do something really
Well,
wild?
I mean, if he truly is a madman, as we are being led to believe, we should at least recognize that this is a madman with perhaps the world's most sophisticated nuclear arsenal. Game theory would say that if you're dealing with a madman with a sophisticated nuclear arsenal, you ought to be perhaps behaving slightly differently than if you're dealing with a madman who only has conventional weapons. It's just a fact. It is just an axiom of the geopolitical analysis that Vladimir Putin not only has sophisticated nuclear weapons, but has just threatened to use them and has a very recent track record of following through on his threats. And so it's a really dangerous time. And that's all we're trying to point out. We're not trying to say that we should, you can imagine all of the critiques. And, when you write something, people don't read what you wrote. They read what they think you wrote, which is a pretty amazing experience. We never actually said, the US was to blame for these pipelines. We said, what if they were? And what would that mean? And how big a risk is that? And what are the consequences? That's it.
Back to Putin. I heard him say he was accusing the United States of having set the nuclear precedent in Japan. And I think his comment was, the United States dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan in order to end the war sooner, and that's a precedent worth remembering.
Wow.
And I guess he was implying it would be justified for Russia to go ahead and just drop 1 or 2 nuclear bombs on, I don't know, let's just hypothetically say Kiev, and in order to bring the war to an end sooner and save more lives ultimately. So did you get the impression that was what he was trying to imply?
Yeah, let's analyze the pattern of this madman. So before the Ukraine invasion, he held a big speech. He signed some documents, that changed policy and threatened that he was going to invade, and then he did. And this is the exact same pattern that we're seeing now, which is he held a big speech. He signed some documents, basically annexing former Ukrainian territories as now part of Russia, and threatened that any hostilities in those regions would then now be considered hostilities against Russia itself, and Russia reserves the right to defend itself using all of its weapons, including nuclear weapons. And I don't think it was an accident, as you correctly pointed out, that Putin was pointing to the fact that the US's justification for the dropping of the 2 nuclear bombs on Japan in World War II was to shorten the war and to net save casualties. And Putin is staring at a lot of casualties, so he might be able to justify that to himself. Now, having said that, nuclear weapons today are different and more powerful and more deadly than they were back then. These were sort of primitive nuclear weapons compared to the state of the art today. And the real escalation is, I see some people on Twitter already sort of talking about, tactical is different than full-blown. It's the escalation. Is NATO just going to do nothing if he drops some tactical nukes in Ukraine? No, of course they're going to respond. And then is Russia going to respond? And then next thing you know, within a day, we're not doing a podcast anymore. It's
That's true.
Look, I mean, but what a world we're living in, where we're sitting here talking almost flippantly about nuclear war. It's crazy. 2022 is crazy. Again, all we want to do was raise our hand and say, hey guys, there's some pretty serious risk on the table here. Are we sure? Do we want to at least maybe have a conversation before we just rush in and decide that we're going to, look, if Putin did blow up the pipelines, then, at a minimum, there's the other scenario, which is where open warfare on critical energy choke points is now normalized. That's not good either. So there's no scenario where what happened on September 26th is good for the world. And there's some scenarios that are existential to the world. And whenever you're dealing with an existential threat, that's different. It has to be different than when you're dealing with a sort of manageable threat. And nuclear war, we believe, is different and existential. And we need to have a much more serious conversation about it than what we're seeing on our televisions.
So let's change direction a little bit, and let's talk about, all right, these pipelines are damaged. They're probably flooded with seawater and corroding from the inside, and they're not protected from the inside from seawater, so they're probably out of commission long term, years probably. So what does this mean for Europe short term, or I guess this year and possibly next year in terms of energy? This is a chart that you have in your article, and I guess you are highlighting how much storage as a percentage of annual consumption each country has. So even though they're claiming, hey, we're 85-90% full on storage, depending on the country, that doesn't really mean a lot. Austria, that means a lot, obviously. They've got a lot of storage. Other countries, that they only have a fraction of their annual consumption in storage capacity. So if pipelines are off, everyone's making noise right now just getting through this winter. But guess what? When you get on the other side of winter, that's when they have to rebuild storage. And if pipelines are offline, it's pretty damn tough to rebuild your storage capacity, correct?
Yeah, so lots to unpack there, and I'll take them quickly. We're operating under the assumption that these pipelines are irreversibly destroyed. In the perfect world, as we've been going back and forth with experts in our network, and in a perfect world with flawless international collaboration, you're looking at 20 to 25 weeks, which at a minimum condemns Europe to a very, very difficult winter now. And as you said correctly, and this is why we wanted to highlight it, there's a lot of propaganda on Twitter and other places around, oh, we're at 90% storage, so we're fine. Well, take the UK. The UK can store precisely 1% of its annual consumption in storage. It has none. So what does it matter if the UK is 100% filled?
No.
And so look at Spain, look at Belgium, Italy a little better, Germany a little better. The EU on average is roughly Germany. Austria might be fine, but as somebody pointed out on Twitter, much of that gas is contracted to leave Austria. We'll see if they honor those contracts. It's a complex situation. But these tanks were filled with gas from Nord Stream 1. Nord Stream 1 is offline.
Yeah.
Perhaps forever.
Is anything flowing through? Now, there's two other pipelines that go over land. One that goes through Poland and Germany, and then the other one that comes through the Ukraine into I forget. So are those? How much is gas flowing through those, or is it restricted, or what's going on there?
At reduced levels, and of course, those are now at risk, as we point out in the piece. The last remaining lines actually go through Ukraine, Belarus, those types of connections, and flow on. They happen to, like, what happens if somebody sabotages those. But the point is, forget Nord Stream 2. Nord Stream 1 was a workhorse for the past decade. And it's a combination of flows supplemented by storage. And back to this point about 20 to 25 weeks in the ideal world, if this goes on too long, corrosion becomes too big of an issue. There's also the whole methane hydrate issue, which we're probably too deep technically to get into. We just believe, as analysts, we should just assume these pipelines are coming back online. And if that's the case, Europe has an incredibly tough winter this year. And as you said, they just get to do it all over again, starting in the spring. And this is catastrophic. The biggest loser in all of this is Germany, for sure, because they've been for decades working under the assumption that if they just hugged Russia and Putin economically, that they would pacify them geopolitically. And this takes that off the table, whoever did it.
But so no pipelines or direct. I actually added up the actual volume flows of each of the pipelines: Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2, the Yamal that comes through Belarus and Poland, and the one that comes down through Ukraine.
Yeah.
Nord Stream 1 and 2 add up to over 50% of potential throughput capacity.
Yes.
They were bigger, I guess, more recently designed, had more overall capacity. So greater than 50% of the planned capacity is gone and ain't coming back anytime soon. The others two are reduced dramatically. Is there enough LNG? Now, so what Germany's solution right now, the way they are supplementing their natural gas is they're going out and competing with Asia to get all the LNG shipments from Qatar, from the USA, the major LNG exporters. And so as a result, because they're competing against the world now for those LNG shipments, the price of liquefied natural gas, LNG, has gone up dramatically by a factor of 10x to 15x. It's wildly fluctuating, but it's still generally, is it still roughly 10x above the 5-year average at this point? Doomberg?
So roughly? The challenge, of course, is the heart of your question, which is we don't have the capacity to export it, and they don't have the capacity to receive it. And that's actually seeing price coming off a little bit because the incremental bid doesn't matter anymore. If your tanks are basically full or your import terminals are at capacity, there's only so much you can do. There is no amount of LNG that can replace the 50 BCMs of natural gas that just got destroyed in Nord Stream 1. And if Putin didn't do it, what's his motivation to keep gas flowing through these other pipelines, except maybe to his perceived friendly nations, like Hungary and Belarus and things like that. So yeah, I think again, as soon as we saw the second headline, the consequences of what it means for Europe were devastating and frankly, very sad for us. Like, again, we've expressed many times, we would like peace. We would like a comfortably warm, economically vibrant Europe. We have many friends over there. We take no pleasure in the relative increase in doom that we're seeing in the news flow right now. And yes, the business of doom is booming, but this is not our desired outcome for sure.
So Doomberg, one of the problems that happens when you have these wildly gyrating interest rates and energy prices, there's always counterparty risk. Someone's on the wrong side of these trades, and one of the big issues that people have been speculating about is who's the next Lehman Brothers. And we've seen Credit Suisse. Everyone seems to be talking about this. Their stock price is just tanking relative to the size of this bank and the size of their derivative books. What's your take on, energy crisis can turn into financial crisis? Is there more risk here beyond just the natural gas story?
When you squeeze on a balloon, you just push in the air somewhere else. And all of these bailouts, quote unquote, that we're seeing of power producers and so on, they're really bailing out the counterparties, which in this case is the big European banks. And Credit Suisse, it should be said, is long before this crisis in big trouble. There are many, many scandals. They got crushed by the Bill Hwang fiasco. They were the last to get out, and Goldman and Morgan sold all their stocks and left Credit Suisse with a multi-billion-dollar hole. Whenever there's a scandal, there's either Deutsche Bank or Credit Suisse, and
the two money launderers of Europe, right?
and probably a lot of McKinsey consultants, if we're being totally honest. And so yeah, there's been an awful lot of whispering on Twitter. The dangerous part, of course, is when you're in a liquidity crisis. All it takes is that kind of whispering. It could be self-reinforcing. One of our favorite expressions is that it is amazing how fast you run out of money when people think you might. And so especially banks are essentially confidence games, and if people lose confidence in you. So there is some sporadic reporting that all of the gyrations, as you described them, in the energy and interest rate markets, which are related in our view, all those gyrations are pushing a major investment bank over the edge. And the open speculation on Twitter is that it's Credit Suisse. We shall see. Another thing that we hope doesn't happen, because that would set off a potential series of catastrophic dominoes. And
that's the Lehman Brothers type event at that point, is that they're a big enough.
Yeah, they're systemic.
Bank.
Yeah,
they're
systemic definitely
bank.
Systemic.
Yeah,
for sure.
And so something to keep an eye on. The Fed just keeps, despite everything, they keep raising rates, and they're saying verbally, we're not stopping. We don't care what we're doing to the world financially by these. But we'll see what happens, and that's probably another discussion. But Doomberg, thank you very much. We love having you on, and we'll definitely do it again. Yeah,
the closing options are nuclear war, or in the best case, just complete meltdown of financial systems. So
nice.
With that great news,
I'll take meltdown of the financial system and gold and silver going to the moon.
Let's just hope we don't end up with both. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.